what makes it quite interesting is it doesn't really build on the previous learning units. The previous learning units looked at the interaction between the goods market and the financial markets, and then the output level. And that was really based in, well, either closed or open economy. So we looked at exchange rates, etc. Now, this learning unit really deals with firms, wages, and prices. So where previously we ignored the fact that firms have to respond to an increase in the demand of goods, um, this one really focuses on that, looking at well, the wage and price determination. And this learning unit is important because it's a building block for learning unit 9, which then starts tying everything together again. So yeah, you don't really need to know much about learning units 1 to 7 to understand this learning unit, but it is important for the next learning unit that ties it together. So at the end of the day, you should be able, by the end of this learning unit, to explain the wage and price setting relationships and be able to determine the natural rate of unemployment. And you can use all of this by using the labor market model and using that model to also then explain, well, what changes or what causes a change to the natural rate of unemployment. Okay, next slide. So the first important concept, it's wage determination. So wages are really set in a lot of different ways. They can be set via collective bargaining, so unions negotiating, I don't know, entry-level wages for mine workers, or it can be between you and an employer. When an employer wants to employ you, you negotiate what wage you want to receive, and once a year you negotiate, well, what increase you plan to get. So I think the first important concept is that wages are typically set higher than an employee's reservation wage. Now, that reservation wage is the wage that you prefer to be employed rather than unemployed. Remember, not everybody needs or wants to be employed. It needs to make sense for you to actually travel to work. It still needs to make sense to go through the inconvenience of actually having to spend a whole day in an office or at a site lifting heavy things or whatever the case is. Now, so that's the first concept. So typically your wages are set higher than the reservation wage. Now, the next important concept, and this is something that will tie into the model once we get to the model, is bargaining power. So an employee can have bargaining power, and that your bargaining power is higher if you're skilled or more skilled because there's less people that can do the kind of work that you do. So it's really depending on the nature of the job, whether it's skilled or unskilled, but also labor market conditions, which is really the what we focus on in this learning unit. And that's mainly to do with the unemployment rate. And the unemployment rate, I think everybody kind of has an idea what it is. At the end, I do have in the appendix some information that's South Africa specific, but that's really people that are within the right age group that are looking for a job but can't find a job. So people that are unemployed, so not people that are still studying like most of you on the call, or people that decide to be a stay-at-home mother, etc. It's people that can't find a job but want to find a job. Who's unemployed, and then that's divided by the total labor force that gets you to the unemployment rate. But that influences the bargaining power. A higher unemployment rate means it's more difficult to find a job, so you don't have a lot of bargaining power. The probability of finding a suitable replacement, so if you're the only person that can do a certain job because you're the only person with that skill, you have a lot of bargaining power because they can't find a suitable replacement to replace you. Also just things like labor market laws and regulations also give you, it can give you or take away bargaining power. Another important concept, it doesn't really play into the model that we talk about when we get to it, but it is the efficiency wages. So that just says that, well, regardless of what your bargaining position is, a firm may pay you more than what your reservation wage is due to factors such as increasing productivity or just to try and decrease the turnover rate of workers. Because if you always pay the minimum, as soon as somebody else wants to steal they can offer a little bit more money. So you actually want to pay up for somebody that's becoming more efficient, or just to make sure you don't lose the turnover rate and the internal skills in the company. The concept that we'll deal with next, which is the important one for the model, is wage determination. So I'll just go to the next slide. So in terms of wage determination, inflation, and unemployment, the first thing with wage determination, so how do we determine what the wage will be, what the salary would be for the employee? And for everyone on the call, I didn't mention it at the start, but if you want to interrupt me with questions, feel free to put your hand up, or if I don't see your hand, just interrupt me. I'm happy to do that. But maybe if we can just start with the first section, which is really wage determination. So this is a very important section. So we express wages in nominal terms and not in terms of goods and services. So this is the first important concept, I would say, in that, well, we say we want to receive 100 Rand an hour. We don't say we want to receive 1 Woolies chicken an hour. So that's the first thing, because so we expect it in nominal terms. But however, we do want to be able to to be able to purchase 1 Woolies chicken with that 100 Rand that we bargained for. So if the price of a chicken goes up by 10%, actually to receive 110 Rand as my wage, because that's what I want to buy for 1 hour's worth of labor. But I can't ask them to pay me a chicken. I can only ask them to pay me in rands. So that's the first thing. So what we want to obtain, or the targeted real wage, is linked to inflation or price expectation. So if I think the price of the chicken is going up, so PE is not in the Eastern Cape, it's the price expectations. So if I think the price expectations are, or prices will rise, the wage that I'm going to ask for is going to increase. And if I think price expectations will fall, so if I think the price of chicken is coming down, I'm willing to accept a lower wage. So I'm not going to fight so hard to receive more money, because I know, look, the prices are coming down, I'll still be able to feed my family. So that's the first relationship. So what you'll see is it's a positive relationship. So as price expectations increase, wage expectations, or the wage demand, would increase. Same thing on the other side. It's in the same direction. So if we say it's a positive relationship, it means it's in the same direction. So if the economy is in a recession, or we've got a slow growth environment like we've got currently, and firms are reducing their workforce due to a decline in sales or profitability, and unemployment increases, then your bargaining power decreases, because if there's more people unemployed, it's easier for firms to find suitable replacements. So you don't have as much bargaining power. So the wage you will ask for, or can ask for, would be less, irrespective of your price expectations. So generally, if the economy is doing well, then you can unemployment would decrease. You can ask for higher wages. So that's a negative relationship. It's in opposite directions. If unemployment goes up, wage demands go down due to the change in the bargaining power. So always think about it from the employee's perspective. If unemployment moves in a certain direction, can you are you in a better or worse position? Can you ask for better or for higher wages or not? Then another factor influencing what you can ask for wages is what we call, or kind of group everything else as institutional factors. We represent this as Z, but institutional factors is basically everything else that's not prices or unemployment rate that affects the bargaining power of employees. So that's things like unemployment insurance. Especially in developed markets, you've got quite good unemployment insurance. So let's say in Canada or America or in Europe. So over there, if they do fire you, you have 3 or 6 months worth of payments coming your way, or social security, that you're not as afraid of losing your job as you are in certain other countries like ourselves, where you don't really get a lot of benefits, or the government doesn't really pay a lot. So things like that, minimum wages. So that automatically increases the nominal wage at a given employment rate. Now, it can have effects on the employment rate, but it does increase wages. Labor laws, collective bargaining, all these things can affect the bargaining power at the end of the day. Now, as we said, they're represented by Z. And we say this has a positive relationship. So the increase in Z implies an increase in the nominal wage demands. So that's really what we talk about institutional factors. Okay, so at the end of the day, this is the wage function, what it looks like. So W, which is wages, is equal to price expectations, which we said there's a positive relationship, the expected price level, and then it's a function of unemployment rate and institutional factors. So remember, the institutional factors is, well, the institutional factors at a given unemployment rate. So that's why we put it in this function brackets and not just separately. But the important thing is to either, well, preferably not memorize the relationship, preferably understand the relationship. I always found with economics, it's better to try and understand the rationale behind something and not just learn it like a parrot. So, but at the end of the day, you've got a positive relationship. So if price expectations go up, wage demands go up, and the same on the downside. A negative relationship with unemployment and wages. So if unemployment rate goes up, wage demand goes down, and vice versa. If unemployment rate decreases, wages go up. And institutional factors, it's just a positive relationship. That's the way we kind of define it. But yeah, so if things like unemployment insurance increases, then and that benefits the bargaining position of workers, that would increase the wages. Okay, so that's the first side of it, and trust me, we're going to go through the second side of it and then put it all together, and it's going to make a lot more sense. So if you're feeling lost at the moment, don't worry. That's just the first thing. We talked about wages, what influences wages, and we'll make some simplifying assumptions later on to put it all together. So if you are feeling lost, don't worry too much about it yet. The price equation, right? So there are two things in this model that we're busy building up to. It's wages and prices. Now, wages is what employees ask for. Prices is what firms end up charging for the goods and services they offer, which the employees at the end of the day buy, right? So, but at the end of the day, so first of all, on the price equation, so we derive this price equation for economy based on a cost plus profit basis. So this is a simplifying assumption. If any of you do go further with your economics degrees, etc., you'll learn much more complex models. But assumption, it's a cost plus profit basis, right? So what a firm does is they look at what something costs them and they add a markup to that. So we'll see that when we get to this equation at the bottom. Some simplifying assumptions. So we say labor is the only factor of production used. So we only use labor. Think of, I don't know, let's say somebody building building something is probably not right because you have to buy the inputs. But let's say somebody doing a service, somebody cutting your hair, they only really use 1 hour to cut one person's hair, and that's it, right? So labor is the only factor of production used. So Y is equal to AN. Now, why is there two letters here and not just one? It's because we also say, well, there's labor productivity. So do I cut one person's hair in an hour or two persons' hair? So that's why we say AN, right? So N is employment. So let's say that's 1 hours of labor. You can think of it that way for one person. And A is how many people's hair you cut in that hour. But don't worry, we're going to simplify it further and say, well, the production function implies that the labor productivity or the output per worker is constant or equal to 1. So let's just say no matter what you do at this point, you can only cut one person's hair an hour. So A is equal to 1. So the production function is actually just Y is equal to N, right? Because if you multiply N times 1, it's just N. So that's another simplifying assumption that we make, right? So this implies that to double the amount of output, if we want to cut two people's hair, we're going to be working for 2 hours, right? So the marginal product of labor is 1. So if we want to cut two people's hair, if we want to cut the third person's hair, it's another hour. So then you've got to work for 3 hours, right? Or you've got to employ another person to come in to work for an additional hour. So that's kind of what it implies if we make those assumptions. So the marginal cost of the extra unit of output is the wage paid for the additional labor. So what does it cost me as the firm? So I'm the barbershop owner. What does it cost me to cut a second person's hair? Well, I have to pay somebody to come and cut that person's hair for that hour. So if I want to make a profit out of it, so the price equation implies that the price of a unit is equal to the wage times the markup. So I want to make some profit out of it. I mean, I'm the owner. I've got to pay for the electricity, etc., but I also just want to make a profit. So the price is equal to 1 plus the markup, which is a percentage number, times the wage. And once we put numbers to it, you'll see it might make a lot more sense. I know some people don't like seeing formulas this way. Yeah, I tend to like it, but some people might not. You want to see the actual numbers in there, and then it starts making sense. I think that's on the next page. But if we look at this formula, you'll see, I think, two important things. The first thing is if M increases, right? So if M goes up, the price goes up, because if this increases, that's a positive relationship between the markup and the price. So if I want to make more profit as the owner, I've got to charge people more because I'm still paying the employee the same amount of money, right? So that's the first relationship to take note of. So if the markup increases, the price increases, and vice versa. If I drop the markup, the price drops. Then the second important thing is, well, if wages increase, the price increases. So if I pay my employees more, if I go from paying my employee $100 an hour to $110 an hour, and I add my profit margin of, let's say, 10%, the price would increase because I need to charge more for the service now to make that same percentage profit and recover the wage that's being paid. So prices is equal to 1 plus markup times wages. So positive relationship between markup and prices and wages and prices. Okay, now as an example, yeah, there's some definitions here at the top, but we already kind of dealt with those. But as an example, right? So for those that don't like the formulas, this might make more sense. So the wage rate per worker is 50 Rand. So I pay the person cutting the hair 50 Rand as the employer. The employer produces 1 unit, so cut one person's hair. The markup is 20%. So I want to make a 20% profit off this. So the price I charge is equal to 1 plus markup times cost of production, which is the wage. That means 1 plus 0.2. I would recommend for everybody to learn how to, if you see 20%, that means 20 divided by 100, which is 0.2. So it helps to kind of feel like you can interchange a 0.2 and a 20% quite easily. It means exactly the same thing. But okay, so the price per unit, 1 plus markup times cost of production. So 1 plus 0.2, which is my 20%, times, got an X in there, but that's just times 50 Rand, the wage I pay for the worker. So that means I've got to charge $60 for a haircut, right? So 60 Rand for a haircut enables me to pay the employee 50 Rand and make my profit of, well, in this case, 10 Rand profit. So here's 2 examples. Well, what happens if other things, if we move the markup or the wage? So first of all, what happens if the markup increases to 40%? Well, we just replace, I've put it in bold here, but that 0.2 in that formula gets replaced with the 0.4, which is 40%. That means 70 Rand would be the price of the unit. And that's what we said. We said the markup and prices are positively correlated. So you need to be able to calculate this. There is, I think it's activity 8.3 has a couple of examples to play around with this. We're not going to go through that tonight, or the answers are in the study guide. If you do have any questions on that activity or the ones that we're not dealing with tonight, I mean, just post them on the discussion forum. But if you look at this, right, 40% goes in there, it's positively correlated. You end up paying 70 Rand for the haircut, and the firm or the owner of the hair shop gets a slightly bigger profit. Now, what if the markup was 20%, the same as what it was initially, but we paid the employee 10 Rand more? So we pay, 20 Rand more. We paid the employee 70 Rand, right? So what would the price be then? Well, if we do that, we still use the 1 plus 0.2, so the 20% markup. The wage is now 70 Rand. That means the price is 84 Rand, right? So we just replace the 50 Rand with 70 Rand in the formula. Make sure when you put, this is for those that don't use calculators that frequently, make sure that you put the 1 plus 0.2 in brackets when you calculate these, because if you type this in without the brackets into your calculator, you're probably going to get the wrong result. So this is just for those of you that don't use calculators frequently, just remember to put that in brackets, or just say 1.2. So do the maths in your head and say 1.2 or 1.4, because 1 plus 0.4 is 1.4, and same with 1 plus 0.2, right? But again, so what we said in the previous page about the relationship, the wage and the price being positively correlated, this shows it mathematically. If the wage goes from 50 to 70 Rand, the price goes from 60 to 84 Rand, showing that it's positively correlated. So I think that gives us a good sense of price determination and wage determination. We haven't put in numbers on the wage determination per se, but for prices we've been able to calculate them, and we understand the relationships rather than just studying them. So the next thing to look at is the real wage setting relationship. So we understand the first two building blocks, right? So how do wages get set? How do prices get set? But remember, initially I said, look, at the end of the day, you can't ask the employer to pay you in Woolies chicken. You've got to, depending on what happens to prices, you're bargaining to be able to buy a certain amount of food, etc., for your family, right? So what we're doing over here is we're simplifying again putting an assumption to simplify this to really get to the real wage, right? So the real wage, what real means, okay, so nominal means just the actual amount as you see it on your pay slip. Real means how many chickens you can buy. So it's the wage divided by price, right? So that's the way to think about it. Wages divided by the prices or the price level. So you, at the end of the day, it takes out the movement in prices. But the first assumption we make here is that the expected price level. So remember, you think when you're bargaining for a wage, you say, I think prices will go up by a certain amount. You actually don't know. But over here, we assume that what you think is equal to what happens to prices. So price PE is equal to P. That means from our first formula that looked like this, except we had a PE in there for price expectations, we just write it out without the E for expectations, right? So wages is equal to prices times a function of the unemployment rate and institutional factors. Okay, so now we want to get to the real wage. As I said before, the real wage is equal to the wage divided by prices. So we just, divide by P on both sides. So you end up having wage over price is equal to the function, right? So that's really the real wage setting relationship. So the real wage setting relationship can be represented as per the graph on the left. So that's diagram 8.1 in your study guide. So at various levels of unemployment, let's say at an employment level of 5%, we can draw a line up. We get to where it intersects the WS curve, which is the wage setting curve, and that gives us a certain real wage, 0.9 real wage. Now you'll see in the table below how they are calculated. Effectively, the way to read this is you have different nominal wages per unit, per labor unit. The P or the price level is set at 960. I know it doesn't state it properly on the chart, but it's set at 960. That's just W over P. P is equal to 960. And then if you take W divided by P, you get to the different real wages at a different at the various unemployment rates. So that's the real wage setting relationship, right? So it also says, well, for a given price level and a given bargaining position, which is Z, so we're assuming if Z doesn't change, right? The real wage setting relationship is derived by considering the impact of a change in the unemployment rate and the targeted real wage demand of workers. So higher unemployment, you can see that there's the relationship. Higher unemployment, so unemployment going from 5 to 15% means the real wage decreases. So a high unemployment rate means you get paid less in real terms. So not just less in nominal terms, also less in real terms. You can buy less chickens. It's not just less rands. So looking at activity 8.4, which helps you to be able to actually draw this and then kind of understand it. And yeah, so looking at the first part of activity 8.4, it says use the information in the table to construct a wage setting curve and explain why it's downward sloping. So what we do is it's effectively the same numbers we calculated previously, what you can see on the previous page. But what you'll see is just to actually construct it, you need to be able to draw the 3 dots on there, A, B, and C, and then draw a line, but a little bit of a curved line through them. But what it says that is at an unemployment rate of 5, you've got a real wage of 9.6, right? That's what it tells you there in the table. So that's your first dot A. Then at an employment rate of 10%, which is then that 10, you've got a real wage of 8.3. And at an employment rate of 15, you've got a real wage of 0.63. So those are 3 dots. Remember, we draw this as a curve, not just as a straight line. If you do have to draw this for whatever reason, it's just because it will never actually intersect the various axes. It will always be a bit curved. So that's how you would actually draw it, and yeah, that's how you would draw it. So in terms of what happens to the wage setting relationship that we had in this chart, what would happen if legislation provides workers with more bargaining power? So if you've got more bargaining power, so let's say more unemployment benefits, right? So the government says, look, you get fired, similar to what maybe happened during COVID in certain countries. If you get fired, we'll pay your salary for a couple of months, or they would have said to companies, look, we'll actually pay the salaries of people. So like that furlough program they had in the UK, that gives you more bargaining power. So more bargaining power is not just a move along the curve. So a change in the unemployment rate is a move along the curve. So you move from A, B to C, right? That's a change in the unemployment rate. But a change in bargaining position shifts the curve. So now, at an unemployment rate of 5%, instead of being at the 0.96, you are, because the curve shifted, well, to the right or upwards, depending on how you want to read it, because it's to the right and upwards. But it's higher than that 0.96, right? Because the curve shift upwards, you've got more bargaining power. That means you're able to receive a higher real wage at that given level of unemployment. So now in this example, the way they drew it here in the answer is that, well, at that 10%, you're able to receive the same real wage you were previously able to receive at an unemployment rate of 5% because of that move in the curve. And then at 15, it's the same real wage you were able to accept last time at a 10% unemployment rate. So it's just important to understand that, well, what causes a shift in the curve and what does it actually mean? A shift in the curve is better bargaining position, a shift to the right. If it's worst bargaining position, it would be the opposite. It would be a shift to the left. And then, well, what does that actually mean for the real wage? Well, if you can also think about this logically, if you could ask the question, if you've got better bargaining position, do you think your wages will be able to go up or down? I think it's relatively logical. If you've got better bargaining position, we should be able to receive a higher real wage, right? So if you ever get stuck on a question like this, I mean, economics for the most part, in my experience, is quite logical in terms of most of the things. You can kind of think your way through it. So you can always second guess your answers in economics. So you can do something and then you look at this and just take a step back and say, well, does this actually make sense? If my bargaining position increases, should I get a higher or lower wage? Well, higher at that given level of unemployment. So that's the first curve, is really this wage setting curve, the WS curve. Now, in terms of prices, right? So we talked about price setting before. The P is equal to 1 plus M times wage, right? So the price is markup times the wage, right? We talked about that before. Now, because we've now made this assumption of prices and price expectations being the same, we can actually put it all on one chart. But okay, how do we actually draw this in terms of on the same chart, unemployment on the x-axis and real wages, so W over P, real wages on the y-axis. What happens to how do we set or draw the price setting relationship? So first thing is, well, we can write this, we can divide everything by W, right? So P divided by W is then equal to 1 plus the markup, right? So we're almost there. We've got P over W. We actually just need to invert that, right? So we need to say, well, if you invert that to put the W at the top so that it's W over P, effectively you're taking 1 divided by, you're multiplying it, so you're taking, on the right hand side, you say 1 divided by 1 plus the markup, so you just inverted that, and then on the left hand side, you inverted the W and the P. So now this is what that relationship looks like. If we were to draw that, the first, the price setting relationship, if we were to draw that in terms of this chart, that is your equation. Now, the first thing to note is it has no relationship with the unemployment rate, really, right? So there's no U in that. It doesn't matter what the unemployment rate is, this actually remains the same. And so at the end of the day, it's just a horizontal line. No matter at what unemployment rate you are, the price stays the exact same, according to this formula that we've got, right? So at the end of the day, the real wage is implied by the price setting, or implied by the price setting is equal to 1 divided by, and then brackets again, remember the brackets, 1 plus the markup. So it's just basically a horizontal line. And that's quite interesting because that's just horizontal lines. It doesn't matter what actually happens to the employment rate. It doesn't affect the prices or the price setting relationship, rather. As we did in activity 8.4, in 8.4 we dealt a bit with changes to the wage setting relationship. So what does it mean to shift down or up, and movement along or a shift up or down? Now let's look at practically what happens to the price setting equation, right? So okay, well, first up, so the assumptions we're making, okay, the nominal wage is equal to 100 and the markup is 10%. So first of all, what happens to the real wage if the nominal wage increases to 110? So remember your formula for the real wage. Real wage is equal to W over P. It's 1 divided by 1 plus the markup. Now, that means the real wage is not actually influenced by the nominal wage, if you look at it this way, because the real wage is W over P, right? It is equal to 1 over 1 plus M, and the markup stays 10% if the nominal wage increases to 110. So the real wage stays 0.9. So the company pays you, call it the 1 chicken's worth of money an hour. It doesn't matter what, if you get a higher nominal wage, it just increases inflation at the end of the day. At the end of the day, you're still only getting 1 chicken's worth of money. You're only getting 1 chicken's worth of real wage. So that's an important thing to note, because I think a lot of people will get that wrong if you just try to think through it maybe logically. You do have this formula to help you, right? So yeah, and I think that's one of the issues we have when we talk about collective bargaining, etc. Because they'll always say, "No, we want 20% increases as a union. Otherwise, we go on strike. We go on strike for a week. We end up getting 5% in any case." But even if we got the 20%, if everybody gets a 20% wage increase and nobody produces more chickens, you can still only buy the same amount of chickens. So that's maybe the way to think through it logically. The nominal wage, what you actually end up getting on a big aggregate scale, doesn't really change the actual level of output you're able to consume. So yeah, that's maybe the way to think about it logically. Next up, what happens if the markup increases to 20%, right? So if the markup increases 20%, we know from our formula that real wage is equal to 1 over 1 plus m. So then the real wage, would be 0.83. Now, graphically, which is also important to be able to do, you need to be able to calculate these and show it graphically. So the first one graphically is just that horizontal line at 0.9. The second one is now, well, that's a movement or a shift downwards of the price setting curve, right? So we move from PS to PS1. It's a move down because as the markup increases, if the firm tries to make more profit or increases the percentage profit that they want to make, the actual value of your wage goes down, because in this, call it a economy that you've got to buy the output that the firm produces, you can buy less output because the firm's taking out more profit, right? So that means the real wage goes down. And in the last one, if the markup decreases to 5% versus the original 10%, we can again calculate the real wage. We get to 0.95. And again, try to calculate these on your calculators. If you get to different answers, I mean, just remember the brackets on the 1 plus m maybe. That should get you through it. If you still struggle, I mean, you can always ask us to help you on the discussion forums. But yeah, that gets to 0.95. So that's a shift upwards in the PS curve. So important to calculate and understand shift. So markup increases, that's a negative relationship. You've got a decrease, markup decreases. Again, it's a negative relationship, meaning it's the opposite. So markup decreases, the PS curve shifts up. Putting it all together, right? So both of those lines, the WS line which we drew and the PS line that we drew, were effectively on the same axis, right? You had the real wage, W over P, on the left-hand side or on the y-axis, and unemployment on the bottom axis. So you can put them on the same chart and have an intercept, which is over here at point B. But yeah, so maybe starting off. So the equilibrium means, obviously it's generally in economics, the equilibrium is where the two intercept. But the equilibrium in this case means that the real wage chosen in wage setting is equal to the real wage implied by price setting, right? So when we decide on the wage setting, when you negotiate for your higher wage and you talk about the real wage for that level, given level of unemployment, at the end of the day, that needs to be the same as what price setting would imply. And that gets us to the natural rate of unemployment, or the way we showed on the diagram is U and then a small n next to it, so unemployment, the natural rate of unemployment. And the only place where the real wage chosen is equal to in the wage setting and the real wage implied by price setting is the same is at the natural rate of unemployment. And that's at this point A, right? So at this point, price setting says this needs to be the real wage over there. And wage setting says, okay, well, at that level of unemployment, it's the same. So that's the natural rate of unemployment. At any other rate, such as over here at point B, where you've got UN1 and W over P1, at any other rate like that, the workers will bargain for a different, or in this case, a higher real wage than the implied real wage. And that's not necessarily sustainable. And the model is not in equilibrium there, right? So at those levels, you might find the firm's not being willing to pay that, or the firms might say, okay, well, at that level, we've got to increase or move our markups so that we find the balance. So that's not really sustainable, and that's not where the natural rate of unemployment is, right? So the other way to look at the natural rate of unemployment is just more of a definition or explaining it. It's the minimum unemployment rate that results from real or voluntary economic forces. So remember, unemployment rates are never zero. There's always reasons why there's an unemployment rate. So, I mean, it gets dealt with a bit in some of the definitions early on, but in reality, it's a sum of all frictional and structural unemployment when labor is in equilibrium. Now, frictional and structural, there's reasons why there's unemployed. So people can be between jobs. People might be not skilled, or the workforce might not be skilled enough for the types of jobs that are out there. So that's really what that natural rate of unemployment is trying to pick up. So it's a level of unemployment where everything is kind of in equilibrium, and it's really just that frictional and structural reasons why maybe the economy has not grown enough to absorb the labor. Maybe the labor is not skilled enough, and then certain people are just maybe between jobs, or whatever the case might be, trying to improve themselves, even though that shouldn't be picked up by unemployment. That's really where the natural rate of unemployment sits. So I think the next thing to think about as well, what's the implication of this particular model, right? So you can say, no, but this model doesn't capture everything you want to capture, and that's right. This is a very simplified model that we're just trying to introduce you to these concepts, obviously. But what this implication is that labor can only obtain a higher real wage. So, and remember, the amount of chickens I can buy with the money at the end of the day. But you can only achieve a higher real wage if two things happen. That is, if firms decrease their markup, so if the owners of firms reduce the amount of profit they charge on your labor, or if productivity increases. If I'm able to cut two people's hair in an hour, not one person's hair, then guess what? The firm owner will probably still pay me 50 Rand per haircut, but now I get a lot more money at the end of the day I'm able to purchase a lot more goods and services because my productivity increased. So you cannot achieve a higher real wage just by asking your employer, striking and asking the employer to pay you more, because either the employer needs to decrease the profit they're willing to take for you to be able to achieve a higher real wage, or at the end of the day, your productivity needs to increase. This is a very important concept that I think a lot of people don't completely understand necessarily, that as a whole, this is true for an economy as a whole, right? So, and that's what this model is trying to explain. Just touching on some of the factors that will cause a change in the natural rate of unemployment. We kind of introduced the natural rate of unemployment where these things, where these two where the two lines or the price setting relationship and the wage setting relationship intersect. So the only way the natural rate of unemployment can change at the end of the day, right, is if one of these two curves shift. Because if you look at the chart on the previous diagram, the natural rate of unemployment, if these curves stay where they are, it doesn't matter what happens, that natural rate of unemployment where the real wage chosen in the wage setting is equal to the wage implied by price setting is the same, can only be in one spot, right? It can only be at that point A. And on the left-hand chart, it cannot be at that point, it cannot be at that point, it needs to be right in the middle. The natural rate of unemployment is at 10% at the chart on the bottom left. It cannot be at 5 or 15% because then there's an imbalance in that real wage chosen versus the real wage implied. So again, we've dealt with the shifts. What can shift these curves? So the only thing really that can change or shift the WS, the wage setting curve, is changes in the bargaining position of workers. So at the bottom left, you'll see an example of, well, what's the impact on the wage setting if if there's an increase in the bargaining position of workers, so wage setting moves out, and then the natural rate. Sorry, this is the other way around actually. So, no, it's actually, no, it is that way. Sorry about that. But yeah, an improvement such as unemployment insurance, which then increases your bargaining position, right? So that shifts the WS curve out. You're still getting the same real wage at the natural rate of unemployment, but it increases the natural rate of unemployment because if there's more unemployment insurance, I can afford to be unemployed, right? So guess what happens if you give people more grants? The unemployment rate goes up, because why do I need to go work if I can receive a grant or not necessarily a grant, but unemployment insurance? So if I had a job, I lose my job, I still get paid a salary for a certain amount of period. It just increases that, call it the frictional unemployment, people that are between jobs, right? So that's my very first thing. So if you have better bargaining position, unemployment, the natural rate of unemployment will increase, but actually the real wage received stays the same. Then the other one is shown at the bottom right. So change in the markup results in a shift in the PS curve. So an increase in the markup shifts the PS curve downwards, right? So if the firm wants to make more profit, all else being equal, you'll get a lower real wage, right? That's what we dealt with when we talked about this example over here, when the markup went from 0.1 to 0.2, so from 10% to 20%, the curve shifted downwards over there in the middle, well, activity 8.5 point B, right? So the curve shifts downwards. If that curve shifts downwards, the natural rate, so the first relationship as well, the real wage decreases, right? But the natural rate of unemployment also increases because now it intersects at A1, no longer at A, it intersects at A1 because of that move. So those are really the two big factors that will change the natural rate of unemployment, bargaining position, and the markup. So, I mean, in summary, and you'll find a very similar slide if you go to the summary of macroeconomic models. There's a very nice summary on the website. But I mean, in summary, the natural rate of unemployment can only be changed by shifts in either the wage setting or price setting curves, right? So that's what we've shown just now. A change in the unemployment rate will lead to a movement along the wage setting curve. So if it's just a change in the unemployment rate, we're not talking about natural rate of unemployment, just unemployment rate. So if the U moves around, that's just a shift, a movement along. A change in other factors such as bargaining position would cause a shift in the WS curve. So increase in bargaining position is up and to the right. Decrease in bargaining position is down and to the left. A change in markup would lead to a shift in the PS curve. So that's really talking about that. So an increase in the markup would cause a downward shift, a decrease in the markup, an upward shift. But this really talks now to the key things that we've learned now, apart from being able to use the equations. But it's, well, unemployment rate is just a movement along, bargaining position is a shift, markup is a shift, right? And then at the equilibrium position, the targeted real wage implied by wage setting is equal to the real wage implied by price setting. And that is the natural rate of unemployment. So at that point A, where the two intersect, where they are the same. Finishing up with activity 8.6, which just puts a lot of this into practice, right? So again, don't frantically write down the answers. The answers are on the slide and in the study guide. But okay, looking at the first diagram, the diagram on the right, which looks quite familiar. We've actually seen and used this diagram a lot early on in the study guide. But okay, the first question, at which point is the implied real wage equal to the bargained real wage? So, well, okay, let's first say, okay, the implied real wage by price setting is this line. The bargained real wage is on wage setting. So at which point are they equal to one another? That's the intercept, right? At no other point are they equal to one another. That's the only point where you've got the 0.83 in the example here. And now the next question, which just follows on from that, but what's the natural rate of unemployment? So that is at that point, right? The unemployment rate. At point B, what's the unemployment rate there? That's the natural rate of unemployment. That is 10%. I think that's, I mean, if you, okay, what is the implied real wage at the natural rate of unemployment? So, okay, at this 10%, which if you follow the 10% up, what is from there the implied real wage? Go up, 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 up. They intersect there. At that level, the implied real wage is 0.83. So that's the way you kind of track it. You go up from that 10% to where they are there, go to the left, that's 0.83. Okay, so next up, so okay, what is the bargained real wage at the natural rate of, oh, sorry, that's the one we just did at E. At which point is the bargained real wage higher than the implied real wage? Okay, so at which point is that? So at point, we just have 3 points here, right? So we can't say, I don't know, point D over there. We've got point A, B, and C. At which point is the bargained real wage higher than the implied real wage? It's only really, so if I go from 10% up to B, that's 0.83. If I go from 15% up to C, that's 0.63, right? So that's lower. So the bargained real wage is lower at point C. So the only place where it's higher is if I go from the 5% to point A. At point A, the real wage is higher than at the natural rate of unemployment, right? So, or than the implied real wage. At which point is the bargained real wage lower? That's the opposite. So at point C, that's lower than the implied real wage. Remember, implied real wage is this 0.83. So I hope that makes sense. This one is lower, that one's higher. Point A, point C. Okay, so that's just navigating around this model that we've introduced in this in this learning unit, right? Now the next one is, well, okay, we now need to think about the shifts, and we've talked about the shifts, we've introduced the shifts, we looked at them in the previous slide, but now, okay, the question is, well, show what would happen to the natural rate of unemployment if the bargaining position of workers were eroded. So in a lot of the previous ones, we said the bargaining position gets better. So this is eroded, meaning gets worse. So the WS curve, right? If we just think about this, if when things get better, the WS curve shifts to the right and up. If things get worse, it shifts down and to the left. So the WS curve, if you look at this chart on the bottom left, okay, the WS curve shifts down and to the left because the bargaining position gets eroded. So you go from WS to WS1, so it shifts down. Now, what happens to the natural rate of unemployment? The PS curve, nothing happened to the price setting curve because of this change, right? So the price setting curve stayed the same. The natural rate of unemployment would decrease at the end of the day, because of the shift in the WS curve, because of the shift in the wage setting curve. So yeah, it feels a little bit counterintuitive if your unemployment decreased because your bargaining position were eroded, but this is actually quite true. You can actually see it in certain economies, as an example, in the US. In America, you as an employee have almost no bargaining position, or no employee rights, you could almost say. It's a very liberal, open market. You can hire and fire as you please, and that means your bargaining position moved basically down, versus countries like South Africa, where it's actually very difficult or to hire or get rid of people. So you end up in the US, you end up hiring somebody because if it doesn't work out, you can fire them again easily. In South Africa, you end up not hiring a person because you're worried that you're stuck paying this person's salary for the next 5 years because you can't get rid of them, even if your business idea didn't work. So if the bargaining position eroded, the natural rate of unemployment actually decreases, right? But the firms still pay the same real wage. So last question here, show what would happen if to the natural rate of unemployment if firms were forced to decrease their markup. So let's say the government forces Eskom to change their pricing methodology, right? Or forces firms to cap the amount of profit they can charge on their chickens, or whatever the case is. So you can make various examples of how they could do that. There might be a monopoly, or whatever the case is. But if firms were forced to decrease their markup, that means the price setting relationship shifts upwards, right? Because we said there's a negative relationship with the markup and the real wage implied. So that means if you decrease your markup, the curve shifts up. In our previous examples, we had the opposite of that, but this is what happens if you decrease your markup, right? So PS shifts up. That also then means the natural rate of unemployment goes down. So that's shown on this chart here on the bottom right. I hope that all makes sense. Given that we are on 8 o'clock, I'm not going to go through what's in the appendix, but feel free to go through it in your own time. It just talks to concepts in the South African context. There are certain things like the quarterly labor force survey. This is the one that you often would see the unemployment stats being read from. For those of you that are very interested in economics and tend on studying this further, I would suggest Googling the quarterly labor force survey, downloading it and going through it. It's quite interesting. I know I found it very interesting when I was an economics student. So I had to do a project on it once. I think the quarterly labor force survey, if I'm not mistaken, is released by Status A. The QES, I think, is by the Reserve Bank. Slightly different methodologies, but I would suggest going through the quarterly labor force survey. And activity 8.1 to 8.3, they're all there, but we did go through similar examples in the presentation, which is why I didn't go through it, but it kind of just talks through some of the factors and gives you some practical examples of what it could be, of what could drive bargaining position, etc. So feel free to go through those in your own time. The answers are, well, in the presentation, I think in the notes as well, or in the study guide.